Then finally, I want to make mention. So this is the fourth argument that we'll talk about today, and it's Nero and the mark of the beast. Okay. I've done a podcast episode on this before, but I wanted to redo it because now I've been putting them up on YouTube and the videos are a lot better for this anyway, just for being able to see some of how all this plays out. So hopefully, if I remember correctly, to add some of the visuals, this might be helpful. So in Revelation 13, 16 through 18, the text says, also it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark. That is, the name of the beast, or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. All right. So this is the famous passage that deals with the mark of the beast. For Damar, Durbin, Gentry, I can't say every preterist, but most preterists that I've ever heard say, okay, this is very clearly a reference to Nero. Okay. Even some non-preterists would reference this as a mark of Nero, or an attempt by some in the church. I wouldn't agree with that though. So the way this works, a lot of people read this number, and again, I think this is the more common view today, is they read the number 666 as a symbolic viewpoint, okay? Beale, again, is representative of that. He says the 666 repetition connotes the intensification of incompleteness and failure that is summed up in the beast more than anywhere else among fallen humanity. So he takes it as a symbolic view of the number. And again, where we could talk about that, I really just want to zero in on the preterist viewpoint of this. Preterists often want to associate this number 666 with evidence for Nero, okay? And so they use what's known as Gematria to illustrate this. So how does that work? How are we to understand this? So, okay, you got to buckle up for just a second here, because the way Gematria works is basically you have letters that stand for numbers, okay? So like in English, A would stand for 1, B stands for 2, C stands for 3, etc., all the way down, okay? It's a little more complicated than that, but that's the general point. And so the same thing happens in Greek and in Hebrew, and going down the list, those are the things that we would see and recognize. I mean, even today, that exists to a certain degree. So what some people want to do then, the preterists, is they want to take Nero's name and title in Greek and transliterate it into Hebrew, and then take the numerical value of the Hebrew letters, and if you calculate that out, it's 666. All right. So again, what they're doing, just so we're clear, is this is so clear evidence for Nero. They say we'll take Nero's title and name, okay, and really it's a variation of his title. So a variation of his title and his name, and we'll take that, but instead of counting it in Greek, we're going to transliterate it over into Hebrew, and then we will count the Hebrew letters. All right. So that's the multi-step process that this undergoes. And so the letters in Hebrew, this may mean nothing to you, but it's the Kof, Samek, Resh, Nun, Resh, and then the Holam Vav, and then the final Nun. That would be the Keser Neron. So that's the Caesar Nero. Okay, Caesar Nero, that's in Hebrew how you'd spell it. Okay, it looks good at first, and it may be compelling in a simplistic sort of way, but there's a couple major problems. So I have 5 major issues with this, and I've written a little bit on this in the past, so I'm just going to summarize some of this, okay? So on the one hand, for the mark of the beast to be equated with Nero, the title Nero Caesar needs to be used, okay? So his title has to be used instead of just his name. But this seems a little too convenient, because if you have flexibility of using, a variety of different titles, you could actually come up with a bunch of different names. So a lot of people kind of neglect to, assess this information. But if you allow the flexibility to add titles to the different names and all the different possibilities of titles, actually Domitian and Vespasian also would both equal 666. Okay, so you can Remember, because you're just mixing and matching, saying, okay, can I use this title with this name, this title with this name? And you have a lot more flexibility of finding a qualification. In fact, there is on some coins that were found from the time period around Domitian's reign, he actually had a phrase which was a bunch of abbreviations, Akai Domet Sebge, which basically is a bunch of abbreviations together. But if you take all of that which is on the coin during that time of Domitian, and you add all the numerical value, you actually get 666. And so actually we have, if we're going to press things here, now I'm not going to press this, but if we were going to press this, we would actually say there is more evidence that the 666 equates Domitian rather than Nero. All right. I mean, that's because we actually have coin evidence of, these abbreviated titles being found. Okay. So, I mean, if we're going to play that game, let's play that game. But the issue is, so that's the first problem. The first problem is that using the title allows way too much flexibility. Okay. And specifically, this is the second point, is that according to the text itself, if we're going to take scripture seriously, it says that the name, not the title, is the numerical value. All right. So the name, not the title, is the numerical value. So if titles are allowed, that goes beyond what scripture actually said. It says that the name is what equates the number, not the title. And so the way we could illustrate it, this would be this way. Okay. If I said, when we think of the President of the United States, we might say, okay, his name is President Abraham Lincoln. No, that's not his name. The name of the president is Abraham Lincoln, but his name is not President Abraham Lincoln. His name is Abraham Lincoln. Okay. And so obviously we want to be careful not to just say, well, the name is Caesar Nero. The name is Caesar Nero. Well, why wouldn't we say Nero Caesar? There's just so much flexibility there, and that's not what the scriptures actually say. It just says it's his name, not his title. Okay. Now, it should also be noted that what did the early church think about these things? Well, Irenaeus, who is the anti-preterist saint, I guess we could call him. Preterists do not like him at all. But he actually hypothesized using Gematria to find out who it was. So he came up with 3 different names himself. So they were Avanthus, Laetanos, and Tatan. And so he didn't mention Nero being a possible fulfillment. And if that was so obvious that 666 was equated with Nero, why didn't Irenaeus think that it was? He actually says in that section where he talks about this, he says, well, it could be these names, but there's not really any meaning behind that. He says, we will not, however, incur the risk of pronouncing positively as to the name of the Antichrist, for if it were necessary that his name should be distinctly revealed in this present time, it would have been announced by him who beheld the apocalyptic vision. So in other words, what he's saying is that if it was necessary that we know this, John would have told us. That's what he's saying. All right. And then a third problem is that for Nero to fit with 666, a Hebrew transliteration is required. All right. So if you were to have Caesar Nero in Greek, the number would equate 1005, not 666. So actually, there are other sources outside of the Bible that do talk about the numerical value of Nero. And in fact, Suetonius, in his writing, he said that the numerical value of Nero's name is the same as the phrase, he killed his own mother. So, the play on that is that Nero's name is valued at 1005, which is the same if you count up this whole phrase of he killed his own mother, which is also 1005. And so the play there was that, look at Nero's a terrible person because he killed his own mother or whatever. So if we're talking about Revelation, Revelation is written to what kind of audience? To a Greek-speaking audience. Let's be clear. And this is very basic, but I think a lot of people just get caught up in this, whole, oh yeah, the transliteration, all that. But listen, Revelation is written to Greek speakers. And let's put it this way. Hebrew was one of the least common languages of the day. Greek was probably most common. The only one that may have been close to that would be Aramaic as well. Now, there were people who spoke Hebrew, but they were usually the scholars and the scribes. And by and large, the scholars and the scribes weren't a part of the faithful Christians, okay, at least from what we see from New Testament times. There were certainly some of the Pharisees that jumped ship and became Jesus' disciples, but few, and I think far between from the indication we get in Acts. So we have Hebrew being very much the language that is used the least, and the people would primarily be thinking in Aramaic and in Greek. Now, anybody who speaks multiple languages, you think in your mother tongue primarily. And so it would be very difficult for somebody to get a message in Greek and say, okay, I'm going to transliterate that, but I'm not going to do it in Greek. I'm not going to run this transliteration in Greek. I'm actually going to run it. Oh, also not Aramaic, even though that's my other main language. I'm actually going to go down the list and do Hebrew, even though none of these other New Testament documents are being written in Hebrew. They're all written in Greek. We all speak Greek. That's primarily how we're communicating, also with Aramaic, but we're going to do Hebrew instead, even though many of us, don't even write in Hebrew, okay? Or we don't have that capacity. It just is so far-fetched. It's very difficult to take it seriously, honestly. I think the only people who are going to take 666 as a reference to Nero seriously are the people who are already convinced that it's true. All right, but another one. Let's just keep throwing out more reasons for this. So number 4, for Nero to fit with 666, a defective spelling is required. Okay, now what I mean by defective, those of you who don't know Hebrew, I'm assuming most of you don't have Hebrew knowledge, is that you can spell words multiple ways. And there are more common ways of spelling and less common ways of spelling. All right, now there are what's known as defective spellings, which became much more common once the Masoretes implemented their vowel systems with regard, between 500 and 900 AD, so well after the writing of Revelation. But during the Hebrew phase that Revelation would have been written in, we have plenty of evidence from the Dead Sea Scrolls where you would have what's known as plene spellings with full letter vowel spellings. And so there's a little mark that's called a yod that would be the common way that Caesar would be spelled in Hebrew, okay? Now, according to my research that I've done, there may be and we put the emphasis on maybe, one Hebrew fragment found at Marabaat, which could have a defective spelling for Caesar, but the scroll's actually corrupted so that we don't have the final letters to be able to tell, okay? So that's the best evidence that the spelling of Caesar that needs to be utilized for this Gematria could exist. There might have been a scroll, but we're not sure. So just to really put a exclamation point on this, is that the normal spelling for Caesar that exists, listing the Jewish sources, the Talmuds, Mishnah, Tosefta, the Tiny Attic material, all of them spell it with the full spelling, which would be if you are interested, it's Kof, Samek, Yod, Resh. Okay? But if you do that, the Yod is worth 10. So it's like a game of Jeopardy. 10 is too much. So that would put it at 676, not 666. All right? So that's a problem. And I should also point out that this is, again, it shows kind of the inconsistency and selectiveness of the preterists, because they'll say, okay, Caesar has to be used defective spelling, but Neron does not use defective spelling, which uses a full holum letter vav, which could technically be left off as well. So the point is, it's just very, very selective. Neron is not used with the defective spelling, but the other one is. And yeah, it's just a mess. It's just a mess. All right, final argument against this point, then we'll put it to rest. All right. The early church did not understand the 666 to be a reference to Nero. So I already referenced Irenaeus, the patron saint of the anti-preterist viewpoint. He obviously speaks a lot on these kinds of issues. I mentioned that. But additionally, he talks about a textual variant that existed as a 616, so 616. And he said, there's also another reading out there that's 616 instead of 666. Now, some people it's probably a copyist error. That's what's going on there. You just, as a scribe's going along, he makes a copy. But some people have argued that, hey, listen, that 616 variant is a part of some people, the Christian community, just trying to make it more obvious that Nero was the one who's obviously being referred to by that, because the Latin form of Nero's title, it translated into Hebrew, is 616. So you understand what he's saying? So if you take Latin now and take the Latin form and transliterate that into Hebrew, then that's 616. Okay, obviously we're going down crazy corner with all of that, right? And it should be pointed out that with that standard, you could make the 616 refer to Caligula or to Titus. Okay, so I mean, again, with these kinds of standards, which means no standards, we are allowed to make whatever we want of these things. Okay, a lot of problems with that, and maybe the best way to conclude this particular issue is with a quote that G.K. Beale cites in his commentary from somebody who wrote a historical introduction on these issues named Salmon. He says this: first, if the proper name by itself will not yield it, add a title. Second, if the sum cannot be found in Greek, try Hebrew or even Latin. Thirdly, do not be too particular about the spelling. We cannot infer much from the fact that a key fits the lock if it is a lock in which almost any key will turn. I love how he talks about that, and obviously it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek kind of discussion, because what he's saying in essence is, listen, by this kind of logic and standard, you could make 666, 616 mean anybody or anything, right? And so the way he says that is, we cannot infer much from the fact that a key fits the lock if almost any key will fit the lock, right? And so I just, I look at this kind of, people hold this up. I remember seeing an interview with Jeff Durbin, and he was talking about how this was just so conclusive evidence that Nero was the one that was being talked about. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, really, would anybody who objectively came to this and looked at the evidence that, I've just laid out in front of us, would we say, oh yeah, for sure, slam dunk Nero. Everybody should come away with Nero. I don't see that at all. And so I think we've run into some problems. And I think maybe the theme of the day, as we've gone through a lot of the preterist arguments, is just to talk about inconsistency.